motion, Senator White.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Senators, today I'm going to present an amendment in the form of an addition to the legislation C-45. It was discussed in a similar form during discussion and decision in committee, and I'll discuss the difference slightly and the rationale for the proposed amendment. This amendment pertains specifically to the retention of cannabis plants by law enforcement or inspectors who seize said plants under lawful authority, for example, a court order obtained through a search warrant. In practical terms, police officers seize cannabis plants from a residence under authority of a search warrant, which grants seizure of those plants. Today, under authority the police possess pre-C-45, the police would cut down those plants, secure in whole or in part for court purposes. This amendment that I'm going to present to C-45 would as well allow law enforcement or inspectors to do it in the same manner by cutting the plants rather than maintaining in a growth form. The police would still be required to maintain whatever evidence is necessary for proceedings. Today it is believed that C-45 does not sufficiently cover the ability for law enforcement to cut the plant for storage and seizure. This was presented in committee and discussed with the authorities. I would argue that absent my amendment, the police would be expected to maintain the plant in a seized form as a living plant. It may not seem difficult, but the impact to the police would be in that they would be expected to build greenhouses, hire staff, contract others to maintain the evidence in a living form. This would mean an extraordinary expense to the police or inspectors under the legislation is not feasible, practical, or necessary. I say feasible because the cost could be exorbitant. I say practical as we do not do this now under similar lawful seizures. We cut the plant, often keep a small amount with photographic evidence, and destroy the remainder. I would say it's not necessary, as this amendment would add a section that would allow for people who have a lawful claim following proceedings to be granted reimbursement for their loss, if appropriate, as is required, in fact, in law in other cases. The other reality is that should law enforcement be required to maintain the living plant, the issues of storage, as I mentioned, becomes a reality, but as well, the harvesting of the plant material could be argued, and the return of the 6-foot plant 2 years later, along with 200 pounds of marijuana, could be a real problem for the police. My amendment would allow the officials to cut down the plant seized, as they do now under federal legislation, protect the public through a level of reimbursement offer in the amendment, and that it could be determined that the person who was to have legitimately received the plants would actually be made whole again through this amendment. Therefore, I move that the bill not now be read a third time, but that it be amended on page 69 by adding the following after line 35. 108.1 sub 1, a peace officer, inspector, or prescribed person who seizes, fines, or otherwise acquires a cannabis plant in the course of the administration or enforcement of this Act or any other Act of Parliament is not obligated to remain and it says cannabis plant, not obligated to maintain or preserve it. Sub 2, if a cannabis plant that is ordered to be returned under Section 103 or 107 has perished or been disposed of, an amount equal to its value must be paid to this person to whom its return is ordered. Thank you very much.
It was moved, pardon me? Sorry. It was moved by the Honourable Senator White, seconded by the Honourable Senator Doyle, that Bill C-45 be not now read a third time, but that it be amended on page 69. May I dispense? Do you have a question, Senator Eglinton?
I forgot reading.
Senator White, to take a question?
Absolutely, thank you.
Your turn. This is a different amendment than we considered at Social Affairs Committee. It had, first of all, it has cannabis plant instead of just cannabis, which is a broader definition, and it also has, if it has to be disposed of and ultimately was found to be wrongly taken in, that amount equal to its value be paid out. So there is a compensation. However, the clause right after the clause you're amending, 109 subsection 1 says that they can dispose. The police can dispose, but they have to send a report to the minister. So isn't it covered, and isn't it better that the minister have that kind of control over it instead of an automatic disposal?
White.
Thank you very much for the question. It's not the manner in which we would do it today. And I guess what I'm trying to do is at least have, whether it's through a seizure of drugs through other measures and other acts, that we actually follow the same process. Today, if we were to enter into a residence with 100 plants on a grow operation, we would chop the plants down, we would remove them from the residence, and if found later to be a medical marijuana facility, for example, and lawful, we would have to reimburse. So I'm trying to actually get this in place where it is similar to the other legislation that we operate under. And I also think to burden an administrative system with an approval through the minister, I think would be cumbersome at best, particularly because we're probably talking about small amounts.
Are senators ready for the question? Oh, sorry, Senator Omidvar, question?
Question.
Wait now. Senator Omidvar, question or on debate?
Question for Senator
Question?
White, if he'll take one.
Yes, please.
So I understand that we don't want police officers to become gardeners. I get that. But what happens in a criminal trial if you've destroyed the evidence that needs to be presented?
Senator White.
Well, just so I'm clear, today, if we were to seize 100 plants, we wouldn't bring into the court 100 marijuana plants today. We would bring in a small portion and photographic evidence to explain what was seized. So that's the way we would do it today. Now, to be honest, I'm not suggesting that they're able to destroy evidence. There's already legislation that allows for how they have to maintain evidence and how they have to present it in court. The issue is live plants. That's really the concern in this amendment, specifically live plants, nothing more.
Senator Gold, question?
That's a question. Thank you. Would you take a question?
Always.
Thank you. You mentioned just in your response earlier that you wanted to not require a report to the minister, but do I read the provisions of the Act do not appear to require the approval of the minister, just a report to the minister? Do I read it correctly?
Senator White.
If I may, I didn't actually read that to you. It was read in a question. I don't have that in front of me. So I was repeating what I had heard.
On debate, sorry, question? Senator Boniface, question?
Yes.
Senator Lang.
Would you, Senator, take a question?
Absolutely.
Senator White, can you tell me of any other areas in the criminal code where similar provisions would be for destruction of evidence in that type of circumstance?
Senator White.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Certainly, as I discussed in relation to seizure of marijuana plants, but one of the best ones, and I've been involved in investigation where we seized explosives. To suggest for a minute that the police should keep that in the form it was in for the next 3 years while you go through trial could have been explosive. Instead, we were able to destroy that and just keeping whatever evidence we required just to prove the case in court, but certainly not to maintain that evidence in the form in which we seized it in the first place.
Again.
Thank you. Senator White, I certainly don't think we want an outcome that would require police services to maintain live plants for evidence. I can't see how the Act compels that. So I heard a bit of this at committee when I was there, and we went through all of the provisions that currently take place. And for example, I remember when the old Molson's plant near Barrie was raided, and it was been operating right on the side of the highway for all those years as a grow-up. They came out. They ripped them all out of the pots. They came out with them in garbage bags, full of garbage bags. There was a certain amount retained, and as you said, photographic evidence and lots of video and still photographs, et cetera, et cetera. We don't expect police forces to do it now. And when I read the legislation, if I look at the expedited disposition under 105 and destruction of plants under 106, I don't see anything that compels police forces to maintain the plants for evidence that would negate what the current practice is. So can you just help me understand where it provides for that and what we're trying to correct in the language?
Thank you very much for the question. I think in the absence of allowing us to destroy it, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and others have identified that they would like to see the legislation be clear about what you can do. So really all we're trying to do is be clear about what the police can do. Their belief, and certainly it was not presented in committee from the transcript, it was not presented that, no, you're wrong, you actually can destroy it. It wasn't presented by the officials, and in fact, if I would say anything about committee, they spent too much time speaking about the word cannabis and not enough time speaking about cannabis plants. I think if they had focused the energy on cannabis plants, this probably would have been an amendment that had made it through committee rather than being brought here. But the discussion was on cannabis until the very last page of transcript.
Senator Lankin, but Senator White's time has expired. On debate, Senator Angleton.
I appreciate what you're saying about grow ops, and you know those are massive quantities, and so there is a process in place. But we're also bringing into the picture here home cultivation, where you could be seizing 1 or 2 plants that they might be over the 4 plants. So I just want everyone to know what we heard at committee when we questioned this. We were particularly questioning about cannabis in general, but there was the question of the plants kept coming into it as we had the amendment in front of us. The Paul St. Denis, the Senior Counsel Criminal Law Policy Section, the Department of Justice, said that he thought it was somewhat contradictory to tell the police on one hand, you can seize this, but you're not responsible for maintaining it. This would put the police in conflict with some of the provisions of the criminal code. But then Diane LaBelle, General Counsel, Health Canada Legal Services, said that law enforcement can ask for these cannabis plants to be destroyed. Now, I think Senator Gould's quite right about the reading of 109.1. It's to report to the minister. I don't know about the approval being necessary, but this is what Legal Services of Justice Department told us. Law enforcement can ask for these cannabis plants to be destroyed. In other words, it would be displacing a lawful regime for a lawful disposition. So I just point that out, that was part of the testimony we had from Social Affairs.
Senator's ready for the question. An amendment was moved by the Honourable Senator White, seconded by the Honourable Senator Doyle, that Bill C-45 be not now read a 3rd time, but that it be amended on page 69. May I dispense? It's your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion. All those in favour of the motion will please say yea. Yea. All those opposed, nay. Nay. In my opinion, the nays have it. 2 senators rising. We have a 15-minute bell. The vote will take place at